In this tutorial, we'll be animating the tea kettle that was modeled in the previous tutorial. We'll examine some of the more advanced concepts of presentation animation, like more complicated animations, animating the environment, and rendering the animation. To begin, go to File, choose Open, and navigate to the folder where you've saved your file, which is called more_animation. Double-click it to open and hit Yes to confirm. Here you'll see 3 orthographic views and the perspective camera view of the Alias tea kettle. We're going to continue editing this one, and this time we're going to do something that was a little bit different. First step is to go to the animation menu, go down to Show, and pick Toggle Time Slider. We're going to set up our animation so that it starts at frame 0 and ends at frame 100. We're also going to set the FPS over to 30. That's 30 frames per second. Next, I want to show you the SPD window. We took a look at this briefly in class the other day, but if you go to the Utilities menu and you go down to SPD and SPD window, you'll see this, what's called the Scene Block Diagram box. There's a lot of information in here, and it's worthy of zooming out so you can see the full extent of your file initially. You'll notice that when you pick objects in your scene, that they highlight in the scene block diagram. You'll see the white box around it. If you zoom in on that area, you can navigate through this window just like you can in any of your views. You'll see that that box represents that bird on the end of the tea kettle spout. Let's explore the SPD window a little bit. Go up to the decoration layer and choose Pick Objects. You'll notice that it'll highlight the lid knob as well as the 2 decorations on the end of the grip. These objects will highlight in your scene block diagram, and you can see their relationship to everything else in the scene. If you zoom in on the object over here where we were, which is the knob, you can pick just that part by hitting Pick Nothing, Pick Object, selecting that part from the SPD window, picking that object in your scene itself, and you can also change the properties of that object if you go to the Windows menu, go to Information, and then Information Window. This will allow you to change the name of objects and also adjust properties associated with them. Try changing the name of the lid knob so that it's a little more descriptive. Decoration doesn't quite cut it, so let's call it lid knob and hit enter. Notice that it adds an underscore where you put any spaces, so if you ever try and pick an object, make sure you're using the underscore button to select it. Close the information window dialog box and close the SPD window. If you choose Pick Nothing and then Pick Object now, and you type in the name lid_knob, it will select that. But you have to be careful because it will remember case sensitivity. So if I type in lid knob lowercase, it doesn't pick it because I capitalized lid knob in my information window. So it doesn't matter which one you do, but just make sure you remember what you have done in case you want to use that selection technique. Finding and setting the names of objects is very useful and can help you clearly identify specific parts of an object or scene. Try this method next time you need to organize a very complex model. It should help you navigate around the scene. Okay, let's start looking at building this animation. First thing that I want to do is I want to maximize my perspective camera window, and I want to zoom out a little bit so I can see the entirety of the tea kettle. Next, because we're going to build an animation where the tea kettle is all the parts of the tea kettle are coming together, I want to set a keyframe for all of the parts at the end of my animation. Up at the top in the scrub bar, you can notice that our frame indicator is already set to frame 100. So all I need to do here is choose Pick Nothing, Pick Object, draw a box around everything in my scene, and then go up to the Animation menu and hit Set Keyframe. This will set a keyframe for all of the objects in our scene, so now everything in here has at least one keyframe set. Next, we'll start moving the parts around and choosing the time and space where that part moves from. We'll set keyframes for each of these objects, and as we move through, the objects will animate from the beginning to the end and end up in this location. The next step is to start picking individual parts and moving them around. So we want to start by choosing Pick Nothing first, and then Pick Object. We're going to first move the frame indicator to frame 0 on the scrub bar. You can do that either by dragging the frame indicator on the scrub bar, or you can pick this field over here and change its value to 0. I want to move my view here so that I can constrain my movement to the back view. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the tea kettle knob, the one that we just renamed. With that one selected, I'm going to move over to the front view, and I'm going to move out so that I can see space to the left of my tea kettle in this view. Next, I'm going to use the Transform Move tool to take that object, and with my middle mouse button, I'm dragging it out to the left about this far. You don't need to count the exact number of grid spaces, but if it's approximately that far away, that's pretty good. Next, I want to set a keyframe for that object in that position. So I'm going to go to Animation, Set Keyframe again. Don't need to do options on any of these at any point in time. Next, I'm going to choose Pick Nothing and Pick Object again. I'm going to go back to the right view, and in here I'm going to pick my grip handle set by going to the grip handle layer and choosing Pick Objects. Notice that the pivot point for this group of objects is set at the origin. I want to move this, so I'm going to use the Set Pivot tool on the Transform menu. If I grab that point and I drag it straight up so that it rests approximately right between the base of the handle, that'll allow me to then rotate that object from that point instead of around the origin. Let's try this. If I go back to my front view here, I can choose the Rotate tool, and I can use my middle mouse button. Notice it's my middle mouse button. It's always X, Y, and Z for your 3 mouse buttons. X is the left, Y is the middle, and Z is the right. If I choose the middle mouse button here, it'll rotate around the right axis. I can tell this also because my little cheater axis indicator over here in the corner is not displaying the Y, meaning that's the one that's going directly at us. So if I rotate around that axis, it'll rotate in the right orientation. I'm still at frame 0 up top. I've rotated this object down. It's time to set that third step, which is the setting a keyframe. And we're now set with this part. Let's take a look at what we've got so far. Hit the play button, and you'll see that as the animation progresses, the knob moves in and the tea kettle handle moves up. And you can drag the time slider to the end to see the end result. Next, let's deselect everything again. Make sure we're going back to frame 0 in the scrub bar. And I'm going to move the bird at the end of the spout up to where the tea kettle knob was. So first step, pick the bird. Then under the Transform menu, choose the Move tool. And just use your left mouse button and drag this thing so that it sits where the lid knob used to be at the top of the tea kettle. Hit Animation, Set Keyframe. And at this point, you might want to check it in your perspective window to make sure that it's doing the right thing. And looks pretty good, except you'll notice that right about here, right at the end, let me see if I can isolate it. It's in this area. that the bird is intersecting the spout on the tea kettle. We had the same problem the other day. Remember how we fixed it? Let's try this. Go to the right view again, and where the intersection starts, let's go back here and see where that begins. It's about frame 80 when it starts intersecting. So let's go to frame 80. Let's move that bird straight up. Use your right mouse button to constrain the movement. And let's put it right about there and set a keyframe for that bird at that position. Remember, we have the smooth tangency settings set for our objects initially. So when we hit play, the bird will go further up than we currently have the keyframe set for. That's pretty close, but we're not quite there yet. It's still intersecting the spout, like right about at that position. So I'll tell you what, let's fix that keyframe. Let's go back to 80, and let's just move the bird further out and see if that will fix the problem. Hit Animation Set Keyframe, and it will ask you if you want to confirm that you want to overwrite 9 keyframes at frame 80. Yes, you do. Hit the green, hit the OK there, and hit the play button, and now it should be doing the right thing. It's going out far, but it's when it comes back in, it nests in that tea kettle spout without intersecting the object. Okay, at this point, I think we have a basic feel for how to move objects using the keyframe animation tools. Let's try something that's a little different. Let's get into some more detailed stuff. Go up to the Pick menu, choose Pick Nothing and Pick Object, and select one or the other of these spheres that were the decorations on the handle. And let's switch to our front view here and zoom out a little bit so that we can see where our lid knob is. First step is like what we've been doing. Let's grab these guys and let's move them over so that they're in this roughly the same spot as the lid knob itself. I want to move my pivot point up so that I can set it as a center for both of these objects. So we're not going to group anything, we're just going to move the pivot for that group so that it's right in the middle of the lid knob. I'm going to do this because what I want to do is between here and the end of the animation, I want the decoration on the handle to orbit the lid knob as it's going towards it. Let's talk a little bit about how we're going to do that. First step is fairly basic. If we use the rotate tool here, I can actually type in a value, and it will let me set how far I want these things to go around. So remember, you need to be able to be thinking about your axes here. So if I want this thing to look like it's orbiting around here, I need to pick an axis. Let's do the Z. That seems like it makes the most sense. And then I want it to rotate one full orbit between frame 0 and frame 100. So let's type in a value up in the prompt line. We don't need to pick it, just type the numbers 0, 0, 360. So that'd be 360 degrees around that center point. Now, when we hit enter, it doesn't look like anything has happened. That's because it's rotated right back to where it was. If I hit animation set keyframe here at frame 0 and then hit play, we'll be able to see this orbiting movement. And it's a little more impressive if you go to the perspective window, I think. Okay, so you can set not just translation, but also rotation and also scale. The program is very powerful in this regard. There's a lot of things that you can do with just those 3 functions, but we'll continue to move through this and we'll continue to improve upon things as we get further along. As we discussed the other day in class, we talked about the fact that you can animate more than just the translation, rotation, and scale of objects. You can also animate other aspects of your scene. One of those is the environment. So you can actually make it look like your environment is moving as your animation is rendering. For instance, if you wanted clouds moving through your sky or something along those lines. What we're going to do is we're actually going to try and see if we can make that look realistic by adjusting the environment shader using the sky procedure. The purposes of this exercise is to create a component of the scene other than the model that can be animated. This procedure creates a horizon and lets you set the environmental sky and floor. So first step, make sure that nothing is picked in your scene. Then go to Render, Multi-Lister, and Shaders to see your environment shader. It's the first one in the upper left-hand corner. Double click it. And when you see the environment dialog box here, what you want to do is you want to go to the color layer, which is in the, let's see if we can find it here. Sorry, under background. I don't know why they closed that menu initially, but it's closed initially. So you got to open background, then go to map, and we want to scroll down to where it says environments down here. I'm going to choose the one that's called Sky because this one's actually set up to give you options that are related to like what you might see in a sky. Notice that the sky texture is added to our shader window here. When we do that, the environment still looks gray, and the reason that is because we're looking currently in our current view, we're looking down on our scene, so we're only seeing the ground. If we rotate it up and then refresh this window, you'll actually see part of the sky here. Take my word for it now, I'll show you that in a little bit. Let's look at some of the options that we have to set up in our sky texture procedure dialog box. In this editor window, you can expand the sky environment parameters, which is this section that's actually already expanded. And you can make some changes here. Let's do something here that'll make our environment look a little more interesting. First of all, let's change the total brightness from 1 to 0.7, which is a little darker. It looks a little funny in here, but we'll get that looking right here in a minute. Then let's go down to where under the sun parameter section and set the elevation. Instead of 45, let's do 90. This way it'll look a little more like noon in our scene. Next, go down to the floor parameter section and make sure that the has floor checkbox is checked. You'll notice if you uncheck it that the floor disappears in your scene. You can actually see it right here in that shader. We definitely want to make sure that that's on. But what we're going to do is we're going to give it a particular kind of floor. So go ahead and hit the map button there. And notice we're back in our texture procedures dialog box. That's this guy. And we want to go down to the solids section, which is all the way down there at the bottom. And I want to choose the one that's called leather. This is a little odd, but it actually makes it look like stones because the pattern initially isn't scaled. So they look like brown stones or rocks or something like that. The last change that I want to make in here is I want to add my clouds in the sky. Notice it's currently clear, so we need to add those. I'm going to close this window initially and then go to sky texture number 2 to go back to the right level. Then I'm going to go down to the cloud parameters section, and where it says the cloud texture, click the map button. And in here, I want to choose one up at the top called fractal. When I put that in, you'll notice it actually looks like there are clouds in the sky. The fractal is it's basically sort of a random pattern, but makes it look like convincingly like clouds. While we're in this box, I'm going to adjust the settings for the density of the clouds. I actually need to go back a level to get back to my main screen as the cloud parameters settings. Scroll down here where we have that, and let's change our density to 2. Notice that that doesn't increase the number of clouds, it just makes the clouds themselves a little more visible. We can now close the sky texture dialog box, and one of the last things I'm going to do is make sure that my scene is set up correctly for the scene that I'm in. The step for this is there's a little button down here right next to where it says sky texture. If you click this button right here, the one that looks like a cube with an arrow pointing up next to it, that turns on this green grid in your environment. What that's representing is this scene as it sits currently in your environment. You want to make sure that this object rests below the tea kettle, just below the tea kettle, so that your floor isn't overlapping parts of the model. You'll be able to see this if you render, because if the floor is overlapping it, parts underneath it will look like they're colored red. And it looks like it's okay. You can actually pick parts of these things, the sky texture map, and move it up and down so you can tell if it's in the right place or not. Oops, I want to constrain my movement there. And notice there's a floor. If you move it up slightly, you can see there's like a little yellow indicator of a floor. If I put that right under the tea kettle, it'll look pretty good. I want to make sure that the tea kettle's not floating, and I also want to make sure that the floor isn't overlapping any part of the tea kettle model. Once you're happy, go ahead and choose Pick Nothing, and then reselect that little icon there on Sky Texture Box to turn off that grid. Okay, now we're ready to animate our clouds moving through our sky. To do this, I'm going to make sure that my fractal number 2 shader is selected in the shader dialog box. Then I'm going to make sure up at the top that I'm at frame 0. After that, I want to go to the animation menu, go down to Editors and Param Control, which is short for Parameter Control. And under the local parameters, I want to turn on the options for fractal number 2. If you drop this list down, you can actually see the settings for it. And the next thing that I want to do is set up some kind of variation between the first frame and the last frame. I'm going to do this. Notice, first of all, that fractal number 2 falls under the local parameters. So all of these options are local settings. For that reason, we need to go to Animation, Set Keyframe, and Options. And under this menu, we need to make sure that the parameters are set to local, not global. Those are a different set of parameters that we can set for that object. So go ahead and hit Go for frame 0. And notice how fractal number 2 changes to a parallelogram in your parameter control box. Make sure that stays selected. For some reason, when you pick that, it deselects it. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to frame 100, and I'm going to set another parameter for my fractal here. But in order to do this, I need to first do some kind of change to the fractal to make it look like the clouds are moving through the sky. So I'm at frame 100. I'm double-clicking the fractal dialog box here, and the setting that I'm going to change is the surface under surface placement, and it's the V offset that I want to change. So down here, and it's a very subtle change. Clouds don't move that much, so we don't want them to look like they're flying through space. It'll freak people out. Change this setting to 0.1, and that should be sufficient to make it look like those clouds are actually moving through the sky. That's it. Go to Animation, Set Keyframe again, and that should make it look like the clouds are moving in our animation. Okay, it's time to take a look at what we've created so far. When we're ready to go at this point, we actually do need to render our scene. We won't be able to see the clouds moving through the sky in any of the windows, no matter what settings we have turned on or off. So we actually need to create a final animation. First step here is I'm going to close all these dialog boxes. I'm done with fractal number 2. I'm done with the parameter control dialog box. I'm done with my shaders. I want to make sure that I'm rendering my perspective camera, so I need to highlight that window, and I can even maximize it to make sure that everything looks okay. If I want to see the sky, I need to move down so that I can see above the horizon line here. Then I want to make sure that everything that's animating in my scene is visible. So make sure nothing goes out of frame, make sure that it doesn't start too far over here on the left. And everything in this position looks pretty good. We could probably even zoom in a little bit and maybe get a better looking animation. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay. All right. We want to set up the settings for our animation before we get ready to render it. So we talked about this in class. I want to go over it again, make sure you guys have access to this information. Go to the animation menu up top, I'm sorry, the render menu up top, and go to globals. And up at the very top, make sure you hit render all. That's the default setting, so just make sure that says all. Underneath that, check the box for animation. Choose your animation range from the time slider, that's fine. And change your global quality level to high, otherwise you get very tessellated, faceted looking models. So make sure that's set to high, and then for that same reason, go down to global quality parameters and change the mesh tolerance under there to 0.0001. So decimal point, 3 zeros, and a 1. Next, we're going to go down to the bottom, and under image file output, we're going to make sure that the format is set to TIFF, not TIFF16, but just TIFF is fine. And then I'm going to scroll down, and in class today, Aaron was talking about making sure that we're using a setting for our animation that's 1280 by 720. We don't have a preset for that in our list here. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to make sure that you set that up under X resolution and Y resolution. It's currently 640 by 486, which isn't very high. So change that to 1280 on the X and 720 on the Y. That's it. Those are all the settings that you want. Go ahead and close that dialog box. And what we're going to do before we do the final rendering is just go to Render, under Render, and choose Options here, and make sure that we have Ray Tracer selected. This will ensure that we get refractions, reflections, and shadows in our scene. Go ahead and hit Go here, and we'll try, sorry the dog is in the background, we'll make sure that we save this thing out. Remember, when you save your file, that you need to make sure that it's set in its own folder. You're rendering out 100 individual frames here, so that's going to be 100 TIFF files. If you put it on your desktop, you'll lose track of them all. So call this animation 2 or something along those lines. Open that folder, and then just call your animation teakettle. And remember, don't put a number behind it. It'll screw up the settings with After Effects or whatever you're using to compile all these individual frames. So call it teakettle and hit Save. When you do that, it'll start rendering your scene. It's going to do each individual frame for 101 frames because it's going to go from 0 to 100. So this is going to take a while. Let it render. You can go do other things on your computer. I didn't talk about that in this tutorial, but always make sure you're saving frequently. The program does like to crash frequently, and then you'll lose your progress if you don't hit save. So save your files frequently. When this is all done, you can preview the animation in Alias, but the best way to do it is in After Effects. And I'll show you what it ends up looking like here in a second. Okay, so that took about 20 minutes to render. I've loaded it into After Effects using the information we set up in class today. And if we play it back, we can watch what the animation is going to do. Here's what it looks like. Came out looking pretty good. The clouds are moving at a relatively decent pace. Doesn't look too fast, not too slow. Got some nice reflections on the model here. The shadowing is a little weak. The reason that is because we haven't set up the lights in our scene yet. So if we set those up a little better, it'd give us better quality shadowing. But that's basically it. That's the process. Try it out. See if you can make it work. If you want to mess around with lighting, see if that'll help. And let's see what you get.